the Clayman Institute for Gender Research at Stanford University. Reinvigorating gender equality in the 21st century.
So welcome, everyone. It's great to see such a large crowd here on a pretty Tuesday afternoon. This is the third annual Jean Lyman Lecture, sponsored by the Clayman Institute for Gender Research. The Jean Lyman Lecture Series is an annual lecture series that brings to campus a woman or a man who has been a trailblazer in advancing gender equality through either research, writing, or activism. I'm going to say first a bit about Jean Lyman, for whom the lecture is named, and then I'll introduce this year's Jean Lyman lecturer, Sheryl Sandberg. Jean Lyman is a lifelong feminist who connected, fueled, and inspired the women's movement at Stanford and beyond since the 1960s. As a social entrepreneur, she's well known for founding several nonprofit organizations dedicated to improving the lives of women and girls. One important consequence of her work has been to increase the share of philanthropic contributions that go to programs that support women and girls. Jean also played a pivotal role in founding of what is now the Clayman Institute for Gender Research. During the 1970s, as the wife of former Stanford President Richard Lyman, Jean boldly used her influential role to secure support for founding the Institute and to ensure that the new Institute had the funds necessary to make it successful. The Clayman Institute was founded in 1974. It's one of the oldest gender research institutes in the country, and we owe Jean a big round of applause for that contribution. As you know, we've selected Sheryl Sandberg to deliver the Jean Lyman Lecture this year. Sheryl is in many ways an ideal choice to give this lecture. Her recent book, Lean In, Women, Work, and the Will to Lead, along with her earlier TED Talk, which touched upon similar themes, have done nothing short than rekindling feminism. Because of this book, women and men from all sectors of society are talking about gender, discussing why gender inequality persists at work and at home, and they're thinking about how to move forward towards a world where women are more frequently leaders and men are more active participants at home. Like Jean, Sheryl has boldly leveraged her status to advance gender equality. A bit more background about Sheryl. Sheryl has been recognized as one of the most powerful women in the world by Forbes magazine. She is currently the Chief Operating Officer at Facebook, where she oversees the firm's business operation, including sales, marketing, business development, human resources, public policy, and communications. Prior to Facebook, she was at Google as Vice President of Global Online Sales and Operations. She was also instrumental in launching Google.org, Google's philanthropic arm. Before Google, she served as the Chief of Staff for the United States Treasury under President Bill Clinton, where she helped lead the Treasury's work on forgiving debt in the developing world. Sheryl received her BA summa cum laude in economics from Harvard University, and she received an MBA with highest distinction from Harvard Business School. So I think we can all agree that's a pretty impressive bio. Facebook, Google, Bill Clinton, and Harvard. Yet, as I've gotten to know Sheryl over the past year and a half, what's impressed me even more than that impressive bio is her commitment to gender equality and her courage to do something about it. In 2010, Sheryl gave a TED Talk on women's leadership, and that talk has been viewed over 2 million times. Her book has topped the Amazon charts, and Lean In has quickly become a household phrase. As of those of us who study gender, and I see there are many of you in the room, as those of us who study gender can attest, debates over women, work, and family often take on a very controversial tone. It takes courage to walk willingly into these debates. The issue, of course, is that everyone has an opinion, often a strongly held one, on what women should be doing. Should they work? Should they stay home with their kids? Should they have ambition? We also have competing theories about why gender inequality persists. Is it women? Is it discrimination? Is it our organizations? We have different ideas about how to promote change. And as a society, at times, we even disagree about whether gender equality is a desirable outcome. It's into that rocky terrain that Sheryl has boldly walked. Not content to simply be one of the most powerful women in the world, Sheryl has used her status to open the door to a conversation about women, work, and leadership. Then she's helped us to strategize about how to promote gender equality and urged us to lean in. Sheryl, I'd like to personally thank you for all that you have done. I feel very optimistic about where the conversation that Sheryl has started is going to take us. Sheryl, welcome to Stanford. Thank you for being here, and I look forward to your remarks. Thank you.
So I'm going to ask you to do something for me. I want you to take a minute and think about it. I want to ask if you've ever said out loud the following sentence. You have to have said it out loud to someone else. I want to be number one in my field. I want to be the CEO of the company I'm in. I want to run for governor. I want to be the president of Stanford University. Stand up. Stand up if you have ever said that aloud to anyone else. Stand up. So I'm excited to see people stand up. And I'm here today to do just one thing. Just one thing. I'm here to give every person in this audience, every one of you, not just permission, but encouragement to stand up the next time that question is asked. Not just to be number one in your field, CEO, president, governor, but to do anything you're not sure you can do. Anything. The thing you're afraid to do. I want to do this for the men and the women who are here, but I want to especially do this for the women. Because the blunt truth is that men still run the world. Unequivocally, no question about it. There are 17 countries in our world that are run by women. Women have 20% of the parliament seats globally. You may have noticed the headlines I noticed when we got to 20% of the Senate. All these headlines, women are taking over the Senate. You're like, dudes, 20% is not a takeover. 20% is 1/5. There is no country in the world which has 5% of its large companies run by women. Not a single one. And even worse than the fact that these numbers are low is the fact that in many ways we've stopped making progress at the same rate. Women have held 14% of the top jobs in corporate America for 10 years. 10 years of exactly no progress. And all kinds of other trends that so many people in this audience study and understand are also either moving very, very slowly or not moving at all. And what this means is that when the decisions are made that most impact our world, whether they're in a boardroom or a university hall or a town hall or the shop floor, our voices are not equally heard. So I want to spend our time today talking about what holds us back from standing up. Why isn't it that every woman in this audience, every man in this audience, why isn't it that we all stood up? I'm going to ask you to raise your hand why you didn't stand up for those of you who didn't. I have 3 reasons I'm going to offer. It can be many. It can be all 3. It can be one of those. But I want you to take a minute and just think, why didn't you stand up if you didn't? First reason that holds us back. Raise your hand if you didn't stand up because you're not sure you can do that job. You may not have the skills to be CEO, to be president. Stand up if you're not, raise your hand if you're not sure. You didn't stand up because you're not sure you have the skills. So self-confidence is a major determinant of what we can do. And here's what the research tells us. Compared to men, in many instances, women do not feel as self-confident. If you ask men how they did on something, they'll often get it wrong a little high. And women will get it wrong a little low. And more importantly, if you ask a man why he was successful, he'll say, because of my own skills. He'll own that success, and that's a good thing. But if you ask a woman why she was successful, her reasons will be more like working hard, help from others, getting lucky. That's a very big difference, because if you attribute success to yourself, you know it's replicable. If it's because of your skills, when the next opportunity comes along, you know you can do it. But if it's help from others and getting lucky, well, those things might not show up the second time. So it's harder to raise your hand for the last opportunity. I just wrote an entire book on women having more self-confidence, a whole book for 2 really long years. And this still happens to me. The beginning of this year, long after the book was turned in and done, there was a meeting at Facebook of our senior management team. And in this meeting, we were talking about this thing that I thought, this guy, Jay Parikh, and I, for a long time, we thought we should do, and no one else agreed with us. And Jay's one of our senior technical leaders. And over the last couple months, after years of no one agreeing, everyone decided they agreed. And I just thought this was great. And I talk in the book about bringing your whole self to work. I'm pretty emotional at work. So I was saying to everyone, I am so happy to be here. This is such a great meeting. I'm so excited. We're starting this project for all these years. No one agreed. So I wasn't sure. I was right. On and on and on. Jay looks up. I knew Sheryl and I were right and you'd all come around. So I'm Facebook messaging with Jay late one night, and I said, Jay, can I use that story on my book tour? Sure. Jay, do you mind if I use your name when I use that story? Oh, go right ahead. He's the nicest guy in the world. He really is. So I write, don't worry, Jay, I'm not going to make you look egotistical. I'm not worried about that. This plays out for all of us. Watch where people sit in meetings. Relative to position, more men than women will sit at the front of the room, more men than women will sit at the table. Now, ideally, companies and managers, professors, we would just correct for this. We would all understand that women don't feel as self-confident, women don't sit at as many tables or raise their hands, and we could just correct. But it's not so easy. A couple of years ago, I gave this talk at Facebook, this talk on gender inequality and the ways in which women hold themselves back. And later that day, a woman at Facebook came to see me, and she started off by saying, I wanted to talk to you because I learned something today. I'm feeling great. She learned something. Then she said, I learned I need to keep my hand up. Also feeling great. That was one of my core messages for my talk. Then she says, I learned I need to keep my hand up because at the end of the talk, you said you'd take 2 more questions. And after 2 questions, I put my hand down, and so did all the women. And then you took more questions. Only from the men. If it's me, I clearly care about this, giving this talk in my own company, and I can't notice that more men still have their hands up, we can't leave this just to managers. We can't count on anyone else solving that problem. We can try to educate people. Lean In is trying to do that, but the person who is most likely to correct this for you is you. It is your seat at the table. Take it. It's hard to change how you really feel. In all these years, writing this book, doing all this research, no matter what's happened to me, I still feel less confident than Jay Parikh, and probably a lot of men I work next to. But what we can do is we can make that adjustment. I think one of the most important things that happened to me is that in college, I went to a ceremony for the Honor Society of all things, and in that ceremony, it was about feeling like a fraud. And the men and the women in college were inducted separately, so it was all women in this talk. I thought this was the best talk I'd ever heard. This woman was talking about exactly how I feel, how every time I took a test I was about to fail, how someone was gonna find out I didn't really know anything. And I'm watching all the other women nodding too, like this is the best talk we've ever heard. We all felt like frauds. And then afterwards, there was the reception for like the boys' chapter and the girls' chapter all together. And I ran into a friend of mine and I was telling him all about our great talk and he was like, why would that be interesting? And my joke with my roommate later was the men's talk was probably on, how to cope in a world where everyone's not as smart as you are. I can't always get myself to feel self-confident. I still, after writing a book, ascribe my own success to luck, help from others, and working really hard. But I can remember that as a woman, I am more likely to feel that. And I can watch as a man takes a seat at the table, and I can make that adjustment in what I do. And if you make the adjustment in what you do, it turns out the first time you sit at a table, you realize you belong there. And the first time you raise your hand for something you weren't sure you can do, you learn whether or not it works out. And so my message, the message of Lean In, is raise your hand, sit at the table, own your success. Don't let that be the reason you don't stand up for the top job. Second thing that holds us back, raise your hand if you didn't stand up because it's just distasteful to stand up. I mean, who stands up and says, I want to be CEO in front of everyone, right? Raise your hand. It's a little embarrassing, right? You might have actually stood up. You may have said that, but you're not standing up. I've talked a lot about ambition, and it's a conversation that makes a lot of people uncomfortable. So I want to be clear about what I don't mean and what I do. Here's what I don't mean. I don't mean that there aren't women out there that are just as ambitious as any man, because of course there are. And I don't mean that I have the answer and there is one form of ambition and everyone should want to be CEO of a Fortune 500 company. Of course that's not true. We all have to chart our own course and figure out our own goals. But here's what I do mean, and I want to state it unequivocally and unapologetically, that the studies show that starting in junior high, more boys than girls want to lead. If you ask, do you want to be president of your junior high school class? More boys than girls say yes. That's true on college campuses with college presidents, even though there are more women in college than men. That's true of companies, of divisions, of running for office. And it is that leadership ambition gap that we need to understand, acknowledge, and close. Because we will not close the leadership gap until we have more girls wanting to lead. I also want to be clear about where this comes from. It's actually not that surprising that fewer girls than boys or women than men raise their hand for leadership roles. At my wedding, my brother and sister gave a speech. They stood up, they said, "Hi, we're Sheryl's younger brother and sister, David and Michelle. But we're not really her younger brother and sister. We're really her first employees. Employee 1 and employee 2. Because Sheryl never really played as a child. She basically just organized other children's play." And this is funny. It was funny then. But there's a tinge of something that's not funny about that joke, because there's something unseemly about a little girl leading. A national retailer printed up t-shirts, onesies, for babies, for the boys, smart like daddy, for the girls, pretty like mommy. Another national retailer that same year printed up t-shirts for teenage girls that said, "I'm too pretty to do my homework, so my brother has to do it for me." These t-shirts were not printed in 1951, they were printed in 2011. And if you go to the playground this weekend, I promise you will hear people call little girls bossy. And you just won't hear that about little boys, very rarely. These stereotypes that start in childhood are enormously self-perpetuating, and they lead directly to the success and likability penalty that Deb Gruenfeld first taught me about years and years ago. And that penalty holds us back. As men get more successful, they are better liked by women and men. As women get more successful, more powerful, they are often less liked by men and women. Rachel Thomas is here. She's the new president of leanin.org. She was talking to her daughter, Haley, who's 5, about why she took the job. And she said, "Haley, what if I told you that as daddy gets more successful at work, more people like him? But as mommy gets more successful, fewer people like me. What would you say?" And Haley's 5. So she thought she would say, "Well, that's really unfair." But that's not what Haley said. Haley said, "Well, then I'd be less successful. So more people will like me." The good news is that this is a solvable problem. If we become aware of the gender bias that holds women back, if we become aware of the likability penalty women pay, we can change it, and we can change it now. At Facebook, there's a man who works for me, and we were doing our 360 reviews, and he got feedback that one of the women who works for him is too aggressive. And he said to me, "I haven't read your book," which is kind of career limiting on his part. But he said, "But I've been listening to all the things you've said for all these years." And so rather than write down too aggressive in her review, what happens at most companies to most women, he went back to the people that gave that feedback, the man and the woman, and he said, "Can you tell me, what did she do that was too aggressive specifically?" And they answered the question. And then he said, "If a man did exactly those same things, would you have thought he was too aggressive?" And to a person, they said no. The more we have women who are leaders, the more we will associate leadership characteristics with women. The more we have women who are leaders, the less we will be inclined to call our little girls bossy. So when you have a chance to stand up for leadership, stand up. And don't just do it for yourself. Do it because with every person who leans in, with every woman who stands up, we do our part to change those stereotypes. Third thing. Third reason you might not have stood up. Raise your hand if you didn't stand up because it's really hard to have those big jobs and be a good parent. Can't do it. Never see your kids, impossible. Peggy Orenstein, who wrote Cinderella Ate My Daughter, a book so many of us are familiar with, she had a friend who came to her and said that her daughter said, "I have a problem, Mommy." And she said, "What's the problem?" And she said, "Well, I want to be an astronaut." Her daughter's in kindergarten. "And the boy I like wants to be an astronaut." Mother said, "Well, great." And she said, "Oh, no, Mommy. Who's going to watch our kids when we're in space?" "I think it will have to be me." She's in kindergarten. The sad news is she's right, because from my mother's generation to mine, we've made more progress in the workforce in many ways than we've made in the home. We still expect women to do the majority of childcare and housework, even though most women who are mothers in this country work full time. And they do. Women do the great majority of housework and childcare. This fundamentally changes how women approach careers compared to men. Think of a career, having a career and a family, like having a marathon. Long, grueling, ultimately rewarding. You get to the start line. Men and women, equally trained. You could argue with the educational attainment of women in this country, women are even better trained, but let's say equal for argument's sake. Marathon starts, the men start running. What do they hear? What are the messages they hear? You've got this. Keep running. You've got this. You can do it. What do the women hear? Much more skeptical. You sure you want to do this? Does it make sense to start a race you may not finish? Don't you want kids one day? The race continues. The messages go on. The cries for the men get louder. You've got this. Keep going. You're going to cross the finish line. The cries for the women get louder too. Should you be working when you have a child at home? Doesn't your child need you? Men in this audience, if you work full-time and you have children, please raise your hand if anyone has ever said to you, "Should you be working?" Raise your hand. If you're a man, only men here, men. If you're a man, and you work full-time and you have kids, has anyone ever said to you, raise your hand, "Should you be working?" I have yet to see a hand. Yet. I've done this with many thousands of audiences. Women, if you work full-time and you have children, please raise your hand if anyone's ever said to you, "Should you be working?" Like the young girl in Peggy's story, women understand the responsibilities they face. And the thing I've seen over and over in my career is they start preparing for those decisions way too early. I'm fully supportive of any decision a woman or man wants to make. Working in the home, raising kids is really important work. I just think people should make that decision once they have children. Because what I see is so many years before a woman has a child, women are quietly leaning back, making room for children and responsibilities they don't yet have, sitting next to men who are not making those compromises. Fast forward a couple years, by the time that woman has a child, she's working for that guy, even though she might have been better, or she hasn't gotten the raise that would have gotten her the money to pay for childcare, or she doesn't feel as fulfilled because she feels undervalued, because all of those years when she should have been leaning forward, she's leaning back. I'm not saying it's easy to do both or this is the right choice for everyone. I am saying that the best thing women can do, and men, is keep your options open. Make the hard choices when you have to make them, not years before, because you will inadvertently change the decision criteria you will face. I also am very honest in my book. This is hard stuff. This is not easy. The world does not make it easy for women. My son goes to a local public school in Menlo Park, and a couple of years ago on St. Patrick's Day, I dropped him off wearing his favorite blue t-shirt, and the woman who opened the door looked at him, looked at me, and said, "It's St. Patrick's Day. He's supposed to be wearing green." And I thought, really? I'm lucky he has a t-shirt. But I didn't feel good that day. I felt like I was a bad mom. My son needed a green t-shirt. Now, what would have happened if that had happened to my husband? Let's be clear, it never would have happened to my husband, because had he driven our son to school on that day, it wouldn't have mattered what color t-shirt he was wearing. No one was going to say that to him. They would have opened the door and said, "You were such a great guy for driving your son to school." But I drove him to school, so it happened to me. So after a couple hours of sitting at Facebook worrying, like, should I go buy a green t-shirt and drive it to school? Will I be the annoying mom showing up with the green t-shirt? I called my husband. I said, "Oh my God, he doesn't have a green t-shirt. Oh, no, it's so terrible. It's because I work." You know, the usual guilt trip we all put ourselves through. And my husband said, our son's going to learn something really important today. He's going to learn he doesn't have to be like everyone else. Today's a good day for him. I believe that if you think you might want to stay in the workforce, we need to teach women to start out aiming high. You can always take a step back. That option will always be open to you. But if you lean in, you may take a step back or make a decision to stay in based on a more senior position or a position you just like better and is more likely to get you to stay in. I'm also saying that we need to give men and women full choice. Full choice. And full and equal choice means equal encouragement. So what would the world look like? What would the world look like if those three reasons went away, if all of you stood up, if we got to equality, if we had 50% of our companies and institutions run by women and 50% of our homes run by men? I can't claim it'll be utopia with, flowers and guitar playing, even though it might be, actually. But I do think we know a lot. We know our companies would be more productive. Warren Buffett has famously and graciously said that he was so successful partially because he was only competing with half the population. When it comes to filling our leadership ranks, we are basically sourcing from half the population. And if we source from the whole population, we're going to do better. Our institutions, our companies, we're going to do better. We also know that on average, companies with more women in senior leadership roles have better work-life policies for women. And so this is not just about the women that get into the corner office. This is about the women that work in any company they work in, that work throughout our society. We know that at home, families where there's more balance are often happier. Marriages are better. We know that regardless of income level, regardless of maternal involvement, children with more active fathers have better emotional outcomes, better educational outcomes, higher satisfaction. And we know that in many cases, families where men are doing more housework, those marriages are better off. I've said publicly recently that if you want to have more sex with your wife, you should do laundry. And it's working. I hear there's a run on laundry detergent. Lots of men saying, now, which aisle is that on? So how are we going to get there? What are we going to do? We all have to do our part. For the women, the message of Lean In is to believe in ourselves, aim high, understand that you can lead, fight back on the penalties against it. Remember that I didn't see the hands down at Facebook. We can reform our institutions, and we should. I believe in that. But the number one thing you have control of is you. You can sit at that table today. For men, do more to share responsibility at home, and all of us need to encourage that. Just like we don't encourage leadership in women, we don't encourage nurturing in men. We still call the class mommy and me. This is not welcoming. 4% of the stay-at-home parents in this country are men, 4%, and we don't make it easy. I have stories in my book of men who will say that they're on the playground, and not only are people not friendly, people are suspicious. That is not going to work. We need to encourage nurturing. I also believe we need to proactively work towards the women in leadership and change our institutions. We need to have the open and honest dialogue that I don't believe we've had about what's holding women back. So let's take a few examples. Mentorship and sponsorship. We know how important it is for careers. We know people that have mentors and sponsors do better. We know that men get more of them. We like people like us. But here's what we also know and we don't say. A man and a man alone in a room or even at a bar, what does that look like? Mentoring? What does a man and a woman alone look like? What does an older man and a younger woman look like? Every audience in DC said DC. I thought was kind of interesting. A recent survey found that 64% of senior managers who are men in America were nervous about being alone in a room with a woman. Mentorship and sponsorship is all about being alone in a room with someone. If we don't make them at ease about being alone in a room, we will not solve this problem. I have a story in my book of a partner at Goldman Sachs named Bob Steele. He noticed years ago that he didn't feel comfortable having dinner alone with women. So he announced, no dinners. I will have dinner alone with no one. And he took a lot of flack for it at the time. But he was brave, and he made access equal by saying what no one wanted to say. Ken Chenault, the CEO of American Express, did an interview with Fortune for me for my book, and he was asked by the interviewer, will you have dinner alone with a woman? And he was like, absolutely, it's part of my job. I don't care how people get there, how each institution, how each man, how each woman gets there, but let's talk about it and make access equal. Because right now, this is quietly and deadly for women. Let's talk about something else we never talk about. Helping women navigate through the childbearing years. We've gotten this wrong. What is illegal is it is illegal to discriminate based on gender, pregnancy, age, lots of characteristics, and those laws are important. It is not illegal never to mention those things. But we have decided that the best way to not have discrimination is never talk about it. Well, it is not working. Because we know that we lose a lot of our high potential women through those childbearing years. And what do? We never talk about it. And we leave them on their own. My brother, unlike the man who worked for me, did read my book. He's a surgeon. He just moved to Houston, and he's hiring a new team. And just a few weeks ago, he had the following conversation with a woman he made an offer to. He said, I hope you join my team. And she's in her late 20s, just got engaged. He said, you may want to have children one day. You may not. It's not my business. You don't have to talk to me about it. He said, but I watched how my two sisters, I'm one of them, and my wife struggled through those years. They didn't want anyone to know they were pregnant. They didn't want anyone to think they were thinking about getting pregnant. They were worried their jobs or the best parts would be taken away. Does this feel familiar? He said, so in case you come work on my team, I want you to know my door is open. Come talk to me anytime. If you want to have children, I'm not going to give the good surgeries to someone else just because you're pregnant. And I'm going to be here to help you transition out for leave and come back if you want. You won't go through this yourself. That conversation is not only not illegal, that's best practices. And if that conversation starts happening for every woman in the country, where there's an open door, she doesn't have to talk about it, but she has someone to help her, I promise more women are going to stay in through those years, and more women are going to get the opportunities and the equal pay that they deserve. I believe we can do this. I believe we can do this if we all lean in together. No one leans in more than the Clayman Institute. I've had the great privilege and honor of working with Shelley and Lori, who direct this institution. I believe strongly in leadership. I've never met better leaders. They believe in gender equality. They understand how you take academic research and make it apply. And they will stop at nothing to change this world. And it is an honor and a privilege to be able to partner with the two of you. They introduced me to Marianne Cooper. Marianne did all the research for my book and for Lean In. It has been amazing to work with Marianne. She is always on top of every detail, completely passionate, makes me say maybe or sometimes when it's maybe or sometimes, something academics are just better at than business people. But her commitment to really understanding what's going on, her expertise as a sociologist, made all the difference in this book, and I think explains so much of why it's being so widely read. And I just want to take this opportunity to congratulate you on your contribution and your hard work, Marianne. Shelley and Lori also introduced me to Mana Nakagawa. Where's Mana? Somewhere? There she is. Mana, so we've taken Lean In. Lean In's being published in 24 languages so far. And because we don't want anyone to say, well, this is just for American women, we've done the hard work, and it's really been her hard work to localize it for every country. For every country, the book is not just getting translated, but a foreword's getting written by a local woman, and we're putting in the figures and data that's applicable to that market, and this woman has done an amazing job. And I've gotten a chance to work with the Clayman Institute well beyond this book. Over the last number of years, I'm sure a lot of you are familiar, they developed a Voice and Influence program, which was a series of lectures on gender-related topics combined with small group learning. Enormously successful, about 50 people went through the program. My friend Gina Bianchini, a local entrepreneur, was one of them. And Gina knew I was writing a book, went through this program and helped us form leanin.org to solve and bring all of this together. The Voice and Influence program is the basis of leanin.org education. You saw the little trailers for the videos. Amazing things have been done with their help. Shelley Correll, who's now getting recognized in grocery stores, talks about leveling the playing field, something that we really need everyone to understand. Maggie Neal, who sat up there, another Stanford professor, on negotiation. Jennifer Acker on harnessing the power of stories, and Deborah Gruenfeld on power and influence, who's also agreed to join the Lean In board, and I'm so grateful. I think change is starting to happen. Over 120,000 people are active in the Lean In community. There are circles popping up all over the country, and these educational videos are being watched and discussed. I believe what is core to the mission of the Clayman Institute was that knowledge leads to change. I gave a talk on my book in New York to a group of CEOs. I walked off the stage and a man kind of grabbed me and he said, "Thank you." He's a CEO of a big company. And I said, "Why?" And he said, "We have an open job in my company. It's very senior. We have 2 candidates, both internal, man and a woman. The woman's results are slightly better. The man's better liked. We were about to pick the man. I'm picking the woman. Thank you." John Chambers, the CEO of Cisco, a local company, saw one of my book talks, and he wrote a memo that he then released publicly to his top 400 executives. And he said, "God, I thought we were good at this. We're not. We need to get better. I want all of you to read this book, and more importantly, everyone has to send me a note in 2 to 3 weeks of the things you are going to do differently managing women." And I have a friend, yeah, it's pretty amazing. And more importantly, I have a friend who is twins, a son and a daughter, and she says, now every time I'm about to call my daughter bossy, I say instead, my daughter has executive leadership skills. I believe deeply that equality is within our reach, and it's within our reach now. The hard work of the generations before us, of Deborah wrote, of so many people in this audience, of the women who founded the advisory board of the Clayman Institute, from Leslie to Mary Baker to Roberta Katz. So many of you have done so much that set us up for success right now. We get closer to the goal of true equality, person by person, institution by institution. We get closer to the goal of true equality with every single woman who sits at a table, who raises her hand, who leans in. I'm going to end where I began. How many of you want to be number 1 in your fields? How many of you can think of one thing you can do if you weren't afraid? Just one thing. Take a minute. What would you do if you weren't afraid? Stand up. Stand up if you can think of one thing you can do differently because you're not going to be afraid. One table you can sit at, one opportunity you're going to raise your hand for. And don't just do this for yourself. Do this for women all over the world. Thank you.
That was an amazing talk, just very inspiring.
Thank you.
I want to just take a step back first and ask you why you decided to write the book. Spend 2 years of your life doing this when you're obviously a busy person.
So I didn't get here in a very obvious way. I write in my book that, if you had asked me if I was a feminist a few years ago, I would have said no, probably, or I wouldn't have said yes at least. As of 2.5 years ago, I had never said the word woman aloud. Because that's not how you get ahead in the world, right? You don't go around talking about being a woman. First of all, someone might notice you're a woman. Then, you say the word woman in the workforce, you think the person on the other side of the table is going to think you're either, about to sue them or asking for special treatment. Mm-hmm. For men, it's even worse. There's a story in my book of a man running a large institution. He says he'd rather talk about his sex life in public than talk about gender, right? It's a very unsafe topic. But what happened is that, my kind of formative years as a manager have been the last 10 years. And I started seeing exactly what the data shows, which is that all the teams working for me, a lot of Stanford grads at Google and Facebook, At every stage, the men were in my office, at my desk, wanting the next responsibility, saying they could do more, and they were often right. And at so many stages, I would sit down with the woman and say, you should apply for this, or you should run the office. And she would say, I'm still learning in my job, or I'm not sure I'm ready for that. And I just never heard that from men. Mm-hmm. And so I believe that the institutions need to be reformed. I believe in public policy reform. But I also believe that we have internalized these stereotypes and it is now holding us back. And I didn't feel like anyone was talking about that. And so I took a deep breath and gave a TED Talk on this against everyone's advice. People told me I'd be typecast as a woman. And you couldn't be both a business executive and a woman. And I gave this talk, and then I started getting letters and emails from women all over the world with all different circumstances saying, I got a raise. I got a better teacher for my child in a bad school where there aren't good teachers. I got my kid a good teacher. And I argued for something. And so that's why I did this, because I think the conversation needs to continue. I'm super excited about the book. I'm even more excited about leanin.org and the work we're doing with Clayman, because I think it is that community involvement offering these educational pieces that takes this from being a book, which I hope will help some people, but to really being skills that we can teach people and they can use.
That's great. That's great. In your book, you write about that it's important for men to support women as they lean in, and I think that's something we would all very much agree with. I wonder what your strategies are for getting men involved in the move for gender equality.
Yeah, so a number of things. So Debbie Hemmeter is here. She's one of the founders of leanin.org. We've signed up over 160 partners. A lot of the large employers in this country, we've signed up, and they've made a public commitment to lean in, and we're offering our education modules and helping them send up circles. I think examples like John Chambers jumping in, Mohammed El Arian, who runs PIMCO, I've never met him. He's been giving talks about the book and how he needs to do better on women. I think as men see men do it. I think the most important thing we need to explain to men is don't do this as a favor. This isn't a favor. This isn't to be nice to your wife. This is for you. If you are the manager, if John Chambers at Cisco makes Cisco a better place to work for women, he's going to have a competitive advantage recruiting 50% of the population. I talked to him today, that's what he said. He said, I want to be great at this because it's going to make my company better. Mm-hmm. And if you're the manager within your company who can talk about gender issues openly and therefore has more women who want to work for him, you're going to do better too. And there are also huge benefits to being a more involved father and husband. And so I think our message to men is do this for you.
What about for young college men who we have here in the audience?
There are many. There's a great Harvard Business School student named Kunal Modi who wrote actually a piece, Man Up on Gender Equality for the HuffPo. And then I called him, and now he's on our Lean In launch team. And he really talks about how, of his generation, he thinks this is about, again, being a better father, a better partner, a better contributor in the workplace. And so there is some good evidence to say that the millennial generation might be different, but there's not enough. Yeah. This will not happen on its own. Left to its own devices without a real intervention, we don't see trends that would tell us with any certainty that those men are actually going to grow up and do more in their homes. Yeah. And so I think we're going to have to be actively talking about it and communicating it to get there.
The other, the kind of flip side of when you were talking about men needing to support women, you wrote, and I'll quote, I wish it went without saying, women need to support other women too. And I love the I wish it went without saying piece, but I wanted to ask you about how you envision women forming coalitions of women to help support each other.
Yeah. Well, it's Deb's point. It turns out that we're 50% of the population, right? So if we actually work together, we're in really good shape. I think we need to get at the heart of why women. What is that? There is a lot of conversation and some truth to women not supporting women, and I think there are a number of reasons for it. One is that I think there's some historical basis, and I know there are women historians here, so I hope I get this right. But from all the research we did, there's some historical basis to what people talked about as the queen bee phenomenon, in that in the older generations, if you were a woman in the workplace, you actually were competing with the other women there because only one of you was getting promoted, if anyone at all. So there was a reason you were competing. That's gone. Every company I know wants more women, not less. They may not know how to get there, but they at least have the right aspirations. I think the next thing that happens is we expect greater kindness from women. And Marianne, this data, Marianne did a great job on, right? If a man is asked for a favor in the workplace and he does it, everyone feels totally indebted. What a great guy. We should do something for him. If he doesn't do the favor, he's fine. No penalty. If a woman is asked for a favor in the workplace, and she does it, no one feels particularly grateful. She's supposed to do things for other people. And if she doesn't do it, she actually can pay a penalty in terms of lost benefits, lost compensation, lost progression. And so it may be that women aren't as mean to other women, we just have different expectations. But no matter what you think is going on, it's definitely true that if we work together, we can change a lot. I think there's some truth to the fact that women don't always work together because we feel insecure about our own choices. Mm-hmm. It's when you don't feel confident in what you're doing that you can be so judgmental of someone else. Mm-hmm. So, the woman who opens the car door, who's going to be with my son all day, the parent who's not working outside the home, she's volunteering, I can have that pang of, oh my God, she's gonna know more about what my kid does today than I do. And that can make me feel bad and insecure. Mm-hmm. And the other thought I can have is I am so lucky because that woman who's highly educated and fantastic is spending her day making my child have a better education, and I can feel grateful. Mm-hmm. And I think if we can get to more comfort with our own choices, we can be more supportive of each other, and I think we'll get there.
I'm going to ask Sheryl one more question, and then after that, we'll take questions from the audience. So just to get that kind of queued up, if you have a question, there are microphones that are going to be in the aisles up there and down here. So be thinking of your question. And the final question I want to ask you is, I think your book has really created this wonderful moment of inspiration, and I want to hear what you have to think about how we can get from this moment to a movement, something that's more sustainable, and that we can keep this progress going forward.
Well, that's what we're doing with Clayman and leanin.org. We're doing 3 things. Community, so not surprising if you're us, an online community, but we're building one, and you're seeing amazing engagement. We have Lean In stories up there. Condi Rice interviewed me last night. She posted hers yesterday. It's an amazing story, obviously a professor at Stanford. Her Lean In story starts out by being 16, being in college, and a professor in a class she was sitting in announcing that African Americans have lower IQ than whites. Just point blank, while she was in the room. 16 years old, freshman in college. And she raised her hand and said, I don't think that's true. And that's a pretty important Lean In moment. I mean, she's gone on to do amazing things for this country and this university. And there are women there. There's a woman on there whose Lean In story is that she faced her rapist in court. She was raped, gunpoint. She didn't want to see him again. She testified, saw him, and she put him away for 31 and a half years, no parole. And there are stories in there about women who, are working, very low-paid jobs and got their first raise. And it's pretty amazing. The second thing we're doing is education, which we talked about, and the third thing is circles, which I know Gina will come talk about. But we believe that if we bring people, men and women, together to form a community around gender issues and equality and leadership for women and nurturing for men, if we provide education and skills and tools, and if we can give people, in-person and online support through a circle of people that can be their peer mentors, we can change things, one by one by one.
That's great. Okay, so we'll turn to the audience now for questions, and I'll just kind of go around and point to the people with the microphone. So if anybody in this region has a question?
I'm Ann Lehman. I'm Policy Director at the San Francisco Department on the Status of Women, and we work on very similar issues, but more on what corporations can do rather than what individuals can do. So one of the things that we've learned from our research is that corporations, there's 2 really important things they can do. One is to have the CEO support gender equality and make it a high priority. And another is to be really transparent about things like data on how many women are working at high levels. So can you talk a little bit about what Facebook is doing in that regard?
Yeah, so, Facebook has, great women in senior roles. I think women in line roles make a really big difference. So our head of global sales is a woman, our head of policy, our head of design, Stanford grad, is a woman. The other thing we do differently, which is really what Lean In is arguing, is we actually talk about gender issues. At Facebook, managers talk to people and say, if you want to talk to me about maternity leave ever, come talk to me, or paternity leave. We offer equal maternity and paternity leave, 4 months, which is a lot, and we really encourage people to take it. But I think the most important thing we're actually trying to do differently, which again is what Lean In is arguing, is we talk about these issues. We talk about it. Like, you can talk about wanting to take leave, and we have conversations about, like, is the woman too aggressive, or is that gender bias at play? And I think that's something Lean In is trying to help other companies do as well as what you talked about, the very firm commitment from the top to gender equality.
That's a great question. Up at the top, is there a question up at the top?
If you could change or add any law, do you see any spot for that, for improving gender equality?
Oh, yeah. I mean, look, something like 40 to 50% of women in this country don't get a single paid sick day, don't get any maternity leave to take care of themselves or a child. So I think there are really basic laws other countries have that we don't have that we need and we should pass. I note, however, though, and this is important, is that there are countries with really great laws. Look at Scandinavia. They have every public policy we probably would never get to, even though we should. They still have less than 3% of their big companies run by women. And so I am absolutely and unequivocally for policy reform, public policy reform, and institutional reform. I also believe that we have a lot of evidence saying that's not enough. We need that plus breaking down the stereotypes that are holding women back and encouraging women to lead.
Up the top over here.
Hi, my name is Kate Blake, and I'm the owner of a leadership and development company here in San Francisco. And you had mentioned earlier, Sheryl, about bringing your emotion to the office. And many things that I discuss with my clients is really talking and addressing the issue that women showing up in this masculine way and us having to conform to the way that business is done and not, putting on your game face and, almost assimilating or becoming men. And I wondered if you could address any of those topics and your thoughts or on that.
Yeah.
Thanks.
So I talk about this in my book. I talk about authentic communication and bringing your whole self to work. I've publicly said that I cry at work. It's not a best practice. I'm not arguing that, if you want to get a raise today, go cry to your boss. Not like the way to do it, but it happens. And I've talked about it because I want to make it okay for other people, because at least if they happen, they don't have to spend the next 5 days worrying about it as I did. I also think that human beings are incredibly emotional decision makers. We want to think we make decisions based on analytics and data, but even before I met Deb, I knew that we actually make a lot of decisions based on emotion. People make an enormous amount of research decisions based on emotion. And if you understand that and you're willing to confront it, you can just be a better manager and leader. Because you can look at someone and understand why they're making that decision and say, are you doing this because you did it a different way last time and it didn't work out? Are you doing this because you're scared? Why? Why are you insisting on not taking that job? Why are you insisting on staying in that role that doesn't work for you? Men or women. And so I think bringing our whole selves to work and being really authentic about who we are just makes us better managers and leaders.
I'm 25 years old. I identify as gay. Spanish is my first language. My mom is a Bolivian immigrant. And I was very interested when I read the book because it really resonated with things I've heard from her over the years and from my female friends about being a woman in a professional setting. The one thing that I guess I found myself thinking about also as I went through it is, I guess it spoke obviously about the barriers that women face, but it seems to me also that, especially when we're talking about women being divided and everything, there's also a very big matter of, the experience that you have if you're white and straight is going to be different than if you're Latino, if you're an immigrant, if you're LGBT. So I guess I'm just wondering if you can speak to the question of intersectionality for the educational models, or if they would want to add more to it.
Yeah, I thought a lot about this. So, and I thought a lot about how expansive the book can be, because it is true that a lot of the issues I'm talking about for women also are true for any other minority. So any minority, whether it's someone who's gay or someone who is in a minority group, African American or Latino or Latina, a lot of these same things happen to be true. There are a lot of stereotypes about Asians. There's an Asian club at Facebook, and they were all wearing these pins. I may or may not be good at math. Right? So we all face the issues of being a minority, not in power, and the issues of stereotypes affect all of us. And I thought about whether or not I should expand the book and cover more of those things, but one, I didn't have a lot of time. And two, I decided that my contribution was to speak from the research and my own experience, and then hopefully open up the conversation for others. And so in the Lean In community, we are doing a lot of partnerships. We have partnered with most of the African American leading groups, most of the Hispanic leading groups, a lot of the gay and lesbian leading groups. We are trying through the community to partner out, and so that these issues can be explored and others can share their experience as well.
On this side?
Hi, good evening. My name's Alex Scully. Great talk. I was just wondering if you could comment briefly on Yahoo's current reorganization and the conversation of flexible time.
Yeah. So I think it's really hard to know what's happening at Yahoo because there haven't been public statements on it, so it's all kind of rumor, right? I also think the most interesting thing about what's happening as Yahoo is just the scrutiny Marissa faces by being a female CEO. Best Buy did the same thing. Lots of companies make jobs less or more flexible. And the media firestorm on her is about her being a woman, full stop. If she were a man, no one would be paying attention. Now, that doesn't mean that she did or didn't do the right thing. I have no idea if she did or didn't do the right thing, and I don't think anyone else really does. But what happens to women is there are so few of us that you can just pick apart every senior woman, and an action one woman takes gets to represent all women. Try to stereotype a male CEO. Think about one man doing something and then everyone having a firestorm saying men aren't good on flexibility. Would never happen because there are just too many of them. And so I think the answer here is we need to get more women into leadership roles. Because if we just get more women in, women are going to get to do what men get to do, which is be individuals. Just speak for themselves and their own companies, not for their whole gender.
Okay, up at the top.
Hi, my question is regarding climbing up the corporate ladder as a woman. And you mentioned that as women get more successful, people are less likely to like them. So how do you make sure you get the next opportunity as it arises when people around you are less likely to like you?
So it's interesting. I have a bunch of advice in the book on things like how you negotiate as a woman. You know, how you maintain that kind of balance. I thought a lot about writing that too because it's not really advice I want to give. I don't want to give women advice that, you know, you need to negotiate using the word we while men can negotiate using the word I. I want to change the world so that the world changes for women and then women and men can negotiate the same way. But I'm basically a pragmatist and I feel like until we can get there, we might as well get paid the same as men, so we might as well say we and get the next job because then more women will get into leadership and then we can break down those stereotypes. So there's this chicken and egg aspect. I think as a woman, you have to be more careful. I think there is no doubt. I think you have to be more careful. I think you have to be more careful to be more communal. I think you do have to say yes to more things than men. I think you have to worry about these things in ways men don't have to worry about. The practical advice is do all of that. Also help educate people, which is what Lean In is trying to do, about the penalties women pay. Feel comfortable, and hopefully Lean In is starting to help, and the great work the Clayman Institute is starting to help, being able to say, okay, I hear you, I'm too aggressive, but can we talk about, and I'm sure there's some feedback from me in there, but can we talk about whether there's also some gender bias going on? Do you know what I mean by gender bias? We have a great 20-minute video you can watch, which will explain what this is. And so I think we can do both. The most important thing, and this is why I believe so strongly in female leadership, is if it turns out when you run the company, you get to make those decisions. The only meetings in corporate America I've ever attended on gender issues, I was running because I got to Facebook and I was senior enough to do that. And so the good news about reaching for leadership is if you lead, you get to decide. You can have training seminars for every manager in your company about the use of the word aggressive in women. It's a great, great thing you can do.
It's a great thing.
So my name is Lon Harmon. I'm the Senior Director of Game Production at Disney Social Games. 6 months ago, I didn't have this job. I was in a women's leadership class and it opened up with your TED Talk. I was so inspired by that. I went on to ask for a promotion and a raise. Thanks. And 6 months later, I'm now making over 50% more than what I was making 6 months ago. So I have two questions. The first question is, what would it take to get you to have a drink with me for me to thank you? And my second question is, if you could go back in time and talk to your 22-year-old self graduating from undergrad, what is the one piece of advice you would give to yourself?
Yeah, I'm excited about what you've done. That is awesome. What would I give to my 22-year-old self? I think it's the advice in the book about feeling more self-confident and believing more in myself. And I think understanding, when I was 22, I thought it was completely obvious that by the time I got to where I am, I'm in my mid-40s, things would be equal. And I thought I didn't have to worry about this or talk about it. I didn't have to be a feminist because the feminists had already won. It was all equal. And that hasn't happened. And I'm glad I'm doing this now, but I wonder if I could have done more earlier. And I wonder what else all of us can do. Because unless we do something different, this is not changing. As business people, we know trends that go up, the trend for women in leadership went up from like the 1970s till about 10 years ago. And it's basically flat. And people think this is an industry problem. It is not an industry problem. Let's be clear, this is not a problem for finance and tech. This is a problem in every industry. The nonprofit industry has 75% of its workforce are women, and of its senior jobs in the big nonprofits, 21% are women. If you adjust for having 50% of the population women, where do you get 14%? Right back to that average number. In an industry we often think of as run by women. So I guess I would say to my 22-year-old self that this isn't going to work out that well. and we need to do more. And I should have done more earlier. And I think more of us need to be more active on this.
Okay, let's take one more question, and then we're going to have Gina Bianchini join us on the stage.
Hi, my name is Chinyere Nwabugu. I'm a fifth-year PhD here in electrical engineering. I'm from Nigeria. And I have a question. I know you said we should wait to make decisions when we do have kids, but I usually don't limit myself, but I want to have a family. Do you have any advice for people who are really pushing what I think is the boundaries for me right now, but we have plans in future to have a family, and what we can be thinking about now, if anything?
Yeah. So the advice I give women and men, but I think it's more important for women, is that the most important decision you will make for your career, not just your life, is if you have a life partner and who that partner is. If you are a young woman and you have not picked a partner, that decision will determine more of your career than anything else you do. There are no senior women who have partners, and almost all senior women do have partners who don't have really supportive partners. And without it, you will not stay in. And if you will stay in, you will not achieve what you want to achieve. And so, it ruins a date. So maybe not on the first one, but a nice conversation on the division of labor. Have it early. Now, again, if it's a woman, you don't have to have it because it's all going to be fine. Just enjoy your date. But if it's a man, have that conversation early and often. And if he doesn't want to have it, go on a date with someone else. It's really actually the most important thing. Can I add something? I worry sometimes that advice is better if you haven't picked your spouse yet. But I really believe, and I watch this in my own family, that people can change and you can get to more equality at any point in your marriage. I grew up in a very traditional home. My father worked outside the home, my mother worked inside the home, my mother had dinner on the table, on time. And my parents' marriage has gotten more equitable, and they're about to turn 70. And it's happened in the last number of years for them, the last 10 years. And so I don't think it's too late. I think I've heard from a lot of people around the country that Lean In, the book, and what we're doing on the community is having people have the hard conversations in their homes. And I'm really grateful Lean In has started this national conversation. I think that national conversation is important. But progress is going to turn more on the private conversations than the national conversations. This is about the conversations we're having or not having with our employers and our workers and our employees, and the conversations we're having or not having with our spouses and our partners and our children. And so I really do want to encourage people to have those conversations. They're not always fun. They're not always fun for me and my husband, but they need to happen. And if they happen, we will get to a better world of real equality.
Thank you. So at this point, I'd like to ask Gina Bianchini to come up. Gina is the co-founder with... That's a different way of coming up.
Stairs. It just seems so close.
Gina can make things happen. She doesn't need stairs to get up to the stage. Gina is the co-founder of leanin.org with Sheryl, and so I wanted her to come up and we could talk a little bit about leanin.org and Lean In Circles. And I'm just delighted to have you here on the stage with us and wonder if you want to say a little bit about it.
How many people are pretty inspired right now to lead something? Yay! I want to offer up one thing that you can do coming out of tonight, and that's to start a Lean In Circle. A Lean In Circle is us with leanin.org encouraging women and men to find and look around for 8 to 10 other people to meet regularly, to explore and have small group discussions around the education topics that are available from the Clayman Institute and leanin.org, as well as share and support personal experiences, the opportunities that you're facing at home or in the office, as well as the challenges. We think about it as a book club with a purpose. And you know, it meets about 2 hours once a month or 10 times a year. And it's all of the amazing things that you get through peer mentorship. And we think about peer mentorship, as Sheryl said, as being able to pull from the best of the people who are sharing the same life stage you are, and hopefully you can pull together. We've been up with leanin.org for 3 weeks at this point. And some of the things we've seen with Lean In Circles has just been fascinating. One of them, which is actually very relevant to Sheryl's talk tonight, is a lot of women and men would like to join Lean In Circles. I want to encourage everyone in this room to create and lead a Lean In Circle. And we make it actually really easy. So first suggestion, and they're all suggestions, we think every Lean In Circle is going to continue and to thrive because it's relevant and valuable to the people that are making the time to come together, just like you would with a book club. Find a friend, find a colleague, find someone else in this room who's as excited to lead a Lean In Circle as you are. With this partner in crime, or partner in leadership would probably be a better way of saying it as I'm using that expression. With a partner in leadership, identifying other people, friends, colleagues, friends of colleagues and friends that are interested in exploring these education topics, from negotiation to Deb's great work with power and influence, leveling the playing field, as well as team dynamics and harnessing the power of stories. And we basically suggest alternating between education topics as well as personal explorations, where people are sharing their experiences in such a way that everybody can learn. And all of it is really easy to set up. So it's finding a friend, it's identifying and inviting in 8 to 10 people to join your Lean In Circle, and then it's just getting one meeting under your belt, and we call that the kickoff meeting. And one of the most challenging things actually in organizing not just Lean In Circles, but in any small groups. And we're taking the best practices of whether it is book clubs or support groups or weight loss groups or even professional development groups like YPO's amazing forum structure, is actually finding a time to meet. How many people have done that email thread when you're basically going out there and saying like, okay, well, when can everybody meet? And then you wait. And well, we make it really easy for you. So if you go to leanin.org/circles and click create a circle or start a circle, which everyone here tonight is inspired to do because we're all going to lean in and be the leader. We actually have it all the materials. We have these amazing circle kits that are based on, again, on best practices of small groups and that organize and provide a set of guidelines that are really helpful. And then we also make it easy to find a time to meet. Once you invite people in, you can actually poll everybody in your Lean In Circle to just get that first meeting done. So I want to encourage everybody, just that one thing, that you come away from tonight is organizing the first meeting and your lean-in circle to be able to explore these topics together and dive in, or lean in, as the case may be.
Dive in. Did you see in the Mercury News yesterday that there was an article about a Stanford lean-in circle that the Stanford libraries are doing? So I think these are things that can be organized on the campus as well for groups of people.
It's always about the librarians leading the charge.
So we're about out of time. Do either of you have any parting comments? You've given us some marching orders. That's great. Gina, do you have any parting comments that you would like to leave with people, what you think is one thing people could do leaving here today?
Yeah, I mean, I'm really grateful for the opportunity to work with Clayman again and all of you. And, you know, again, I think this is our moment. I think this is our moment to talk about this more honestly and openly, and to really decide that equality matters, to decide that what we have now is not equality because we don't have equal encouragement and opportunity for women and men in different spheres, and do our part to change it. I was grateful everyone stood up at the end, and I look forward to that one thing everyone wants to do.
Thank you so much.